Hi, everyone. Welcome to PeopleMetrics Live. Today, we're reviewing 9 key differences between relationship and transactional customer surveys. So, Sean, I know we get this question a lot of which type of survey should we be using in our Voice of Customer program, relationship or transactional? And which one do you recommend?
I think the answer to that one, Madeline, is yes.
Ah.
They both should be part of a, thorough kind of world-class VOC or customer experience management program. But they definitely have different use cases and they have different objectives, but they're both extremely valuable. And I look forward to going through some of the differences and, highlighting how they're different, but also how they're both very, very important.
Awesome.
Audrey, you run a lot of both of these programs. How would you describe that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you said. I mean, we do have clients who come to us who are doing one or the other, which is great. It's a great place to be collecting feedback and with one of these tools. But in almost all cases, we recommend using both because they really measure different things. And we'll kind of talk about the differences in what they do and what to use them for throughout this session.
One thing before we get to the differences, maybe just a very high level overview on what they each are, and then we'll go through like some of the very specifics on
Yeah,
it.
that
Maybe
sounds
that would
great.
be helpful. So I'll take this. So the relationship surveys typically go out to your entire customer base all at the same time during a certain period of time. Usually it's a week or two that you allow them to provide their feedback. And it's about their overall experience and relationship with you, the organization. So oftentimes Net Promoter Score is asked on that. It's a great question for relationship surveys because Net Promoter Score is a relationship question, right? It's not really a transactional question. And we'll get into that in a second. So it gives you an NPS baseline, Net Promoter Score baseline. It allows you to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are with regard to the overall experience. And these surveys can be long, they're much longer, and we'll get into that too. So you can ask more questions. You can ask about competitor experiences that your customers may have had, so you can compare it to competitors. You can get more deeply into certain aspects of the experience. And it's a great like snapshot, I would call it, of what's going on right now with your customers. And it's a great like start. If you've never done anything in this space, if you haven't done a thing in terms of measuring the customer experience, it's a great way to get a baseline. You understand what your Net Promoter Score is, and then you can start thinking about the transactional programs. And what a transactional program is after you map out all of your touch points that you should include in your relationship survey to begin with, like calling into a call center, visiting a store, in-home visits to websites, downloading apps, portals, whatever, however you interact with your customers, you want to choose the ones that are most important to you in terms of moments of truth. We call it a moment of truth, where if it goes well, it's going to be a great experience and people are probably going to stick around, buy more from you. But if it doesn't do well, they're probably going to say really bad things about you, never come back, etc. And you want to measure that all the time. So transactional programs are, an example is call to a contact center. You want to measure those calls consistently every single time. It's not like you're measuring that the first week of July and then you're done for the rest of the year. You're measuring this every single day. And the reason is because it's such an important touch point. You want to be able to react and respond to negative feedback in as quickly as you can, so you can save those customers from churning or saying bad things about you, either publicly or privately. Audrey, how does that sound? Is it kind of the differences between the two of them?
Yeah, I think that was a great overview. Something that you touched on that I wanted to kind of expand on is Net Promoter Score. It really is a relationship measure, and it should always be used in a relationship survey. We often put it in transactional surveys because people want to know what their NPS is, but really when you're asking how likely are you to recommend, it's really how likely are you to recommend based on all of your experiences with a company, not just your last one. So it's important to use it in relationship surveys. And like you said, getting started with a relationship survey will get you a really great baseline because you reach out to all of your customers and then you can move forward with transactional survey and use that NPS score from your relationship survey as your baseline.
Exactly. NPS is like a bank account measure. You're measuring how much goodwill have you built up over time with your customer within your NPS score. So even if they had a poor experience last time, you may have built enough goodwill that you're still an 8 or 9, right? In terms that's a promoter or almost a promoter. But that's not telling you really what happened on the last interaction. The last interaction is what a transactional program survey program will give you. And that's why, like Audrey said, we often ask another question specific to the last experience. And we're going to get into that when we look at our table. But that's a very good point. So you don't want to withdraw too much from your bank account, or people will leave, or your customers will leave.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point of why it's so important to have both of these different measures.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I think that was a great overview of just the high level differences between these two types of surveys. So are you guys ready to go into our table overview?
Yes.
Yeah,
And some of this was in Listen or Die, right, Madeline?
Yes, it was. And I wanted to mention another thing before we launch into this too. If you are tuning in and you just heard Sean talking about moment of truth and figuring out what those moments of truth are in your customer journey, we have some on our YouTube channel, some videos about how you define those moments of truth, journey mapping, some exercises that you can do to kind of get to those touch points where you should be measuring.
Right. And Listen or Die is a book I wrote a couple of years ago around best practices in voice of customer programs. And this is in there with a lot more detail if anybody's interested.
So I think we kind of talked about this a little bit already, but I think there's a little bit more to say about the difference in purpose between these two different types of surveys.
Right. Let me talk a little bit about this, and then I'll throw it to Audrey. Right. So when you're surveying your entire customer base, one point in time, you don't know really when the last time your customers interacted with you. You may set some guardrails around that, actually, where you may ask for only survey customers who you interacted with within the last 6 to 12 months, say. But it's still 6 to 12 months, right? And so you don't know if they called your contact center last week or they visited your store. Some of them will, some of them won't. So it's it's not an operational survey, right? It's more of a strategic survey that gives you a baseline, typically on Net Promoter Score, as well as just how are you doing overall with your important touch points. So how is your contact center overall? How is your in-store or in-person experience overall? How is your digital experience overall? And these people answering these questions, your customers, some of them will have interacted with your website today, the day that they filled out the survey. Some may not have for a couple months. So, it's not like a transactional survey where when we're surveying you, let's say after you visit a website, we're only surveying the customers who within the last 24 hours visited the website, or in some cases, during their website experience. We can survey them, like what is their experience like? Or on a contact center, we're only surveying customers who called into the contact center over the last day. So we're able to ask about really specific aspects of that experience, including how was it? Was there a problem? Did anyone really super wow you or surprise you or go above and beyond? And things specific to that transaction. Audrey, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I think everything you said there is spot on. With the relationship surveys, you really are asking about overall, what is your experience with this company or organization in all of your experience? It's the aggregate of every interaction you've had. With the transactional survey, we're really asking about that last experience specifically. So the last phone call, your last hotel stay, the last transaction, the last visit to the website, whatever it may be, so that the company is able to provide operational improvements related to your feedback. With the relationship survey, it's not necessarily that they're going to be able to do something specific from what you experienced, but they're going to know what's going on with you and can make overall changes, or we'll just be able to have that baseline to show that they're improving over time.
Hi, it's Madeline. Thanks for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If this is your first time watching, PeopleMetrics Live is a weekly live webinar session where experts from our team answer your questions about customer, employee, and patient experience measurement and management. And sometimes we show you how you can achieve your goals using tools within our experience management platform. We've been doing this for over 2 decades now, and this is a great way for us to share all of our knowledge with you. You can sign up for upcoming sessions of PeopleMetrics Live at www.peoplemetrics.com/events and bring a friend.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but just to make this super real, on a transactional survey, if you call on the contact center, have a poor experience, and you indicate that on a survey, someone in the audience, within our program, we alert our customer client to that poor experience, and someone within our client will contact you to make it right. Like, it's that operational.
Yeah.
Right. We want to make sure it's right for you. In general, that's not happening with relationship surveys, although there are some exceptions. But some B2B type surveys might do this when there's only a very small number of clients. But in general, a relationship survey isn't following up on any individual customer experience. It's taking a look at saying, wow, out of all the touch points, it looks like our contact center needs the most work overall, and people are not happy there. Let's take a holistic look at our contact center. Let's journey map that thing down to, the phone, how they're figuring out how to contact us, how long they're on the phone for. Are they empathetic, and are they knowledgeable, and are they, answering the question on the first call or the second call at the least, very, very most? Are we able to track quality improvement for each rep? Or, all these things you can start really deep diving, and that's more of a strategic thing at a higher level.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Just that example was great of a phone call or follow up can come from transactional, where when you're working with relationship, it's more of a strategic thing, looking at the overall picture. All right. Customer type.
I think we already talked about this, right, Audrey?
Yeah.
I mean, you do this a lot. Like, that's what we usually do. You don't want to send out a relationship survey to anyone you've ever done business with in the whole life of your company, right? Because if they're not active anymore, they're gonna be like, what is this? You do want to have current customers. And that's why we said, sometimes it's the past 6 months, sometimes it's the past 12 months, depending. You could even be at the last 3 months, but it's some sort of recency.
Yeah, it sort of depends on your volume and whether you're B2B or B2C. And, we make those decisions individually, but absolutely someone who's interacted in the recent past.
Right. And we've been saying, by definition, a transactional survey is one based on a touch point where someone had a recent experience. We've been using contact center, we've been using website examples, we've been using store, in-home when that's possible again. There's all these things, all these touch points.
Yeah, and we try to get those surveys out pretty quickly. Best practice would be within 24 hours. Sometimes we have them going out same day. Sometimes we are able to send them sort of in the moment while someone's looking at a website, or they just completed their checkout at a hotel or something like that. But in these transactional cases, we want the transaction or the interaction to be very fresh in the mind of the respondent.
Right. Number 3 is frequency.
Right. So Audrey, we don't want to do these relationship surveys too much, right? What's the highest frequency we've done these?
I would say quarterly is the most we've ever done, but usually we're segmenting the respondent population to do something like that. So twice a year is plenty. Once a year is great. If you're doing year over year trending, that will get you what you need. Whereas with the transactional surveys, they're ongoing. People are having interactions with your company all the time, and then we're continually sending out surveys and receiving responses.
I mean, that's what I was saying, if you don't have a program going on, or maybe you had a program and you stopped, or maybe you want to change your program altogether, starting with a quick strategic baseline where you're reaching out to all your customers is a really easy win for you, especially if you've just taken over like this role. And you can get, really, really good feedback in a short amount of time. So and transactional is amazing for operational improvement. And that's highly, highly recommended. That's the heart of most customer programs, transactional surveys.
So is there ways to, I know you mentioned like quarterly is pretty frequent for doing a relationship survey, but if you've got continuous surveys going on the transactional side, is there a way to make sure that people aren't getting like tons of surveys every time they go to your bank or something like that?
So Audrey's the expert in this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll quarantine somebody's record. So Madeline, if I received your email address 3 times because you called our call center 3 days in a row, you would only be invited for after your first interaction. And then we'll quarantine your contact information for 30 days or 60 days or 6 months, whatever makes sense, so that we're not over surveying you. So you don't have survey fatigue from seeing our invitations. So we want to make sure that we give everyone the chance to provide feedback, but we don't want to over survey.
All right, next we've got outcome measure.
And I think we talked about this a little bit. So with relationship surveys, the outcome measure is almost always Net Promoter Score in some way, shape, or form. And that is, how likely are you to recommend your company to friend, colleague, family, depending on kind of the circumstance. And that's a 0 to 10-point scale. 9s and 10s are promoters, 0 to 6s are detractors, 7s and 8s are passives. Net Promoter Score is calculated by subtracting promoters from detractors, and the range then is -100. So if you have all detractors, you would have a score of -100, or 100, you have all promoters. Generally, these range. Good companies are, what are we seeing? Like 40 plus. Great companies are 70, 80 these days. I've seen data like Peloton is 94, like crazy numbers like that. Like, it can get that high, although that's extremely rare. Can I do a shameless plug for PeopleMetrics here, Madeline? Are you?
Of course.
I was going to do it if you weren't.
We did our Net Promoter Score, our relationship survey, our once-a-year relationship survey. When was that? In January?
In January, yep, early this year.
And our Net Promoter Score was 88, which we're very proud of. So come work with us if you want to find out why people give us such high scores.
Did you know that you can watch past sessions of PeopleMetrics live right here on our YouTube channel? All you have to do is click the link above. Be sure to check them out for answers to dozens of questions, along with stories, tips, short tutorials, and best practices from our team of experts. You can click the bottom right corner of this video to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update.
But the measure on transactional is, along with NPS, as Audrey said, sometimes we will, and most of the time we'll include Net Promoter Score as the first question, but immediately after it, it's how satisfied were you with the most recent experience? And that's usually on some sort of scale, like 1 to 5, very satisfied, very dissatisfied type scale.
Perfect. And there's another video just on our YouTube channel if you want to dive into that. We did one that was all about how you design that email to make sure that you're bringing the most recent experience to top of mind, things like that. So that'll be linked when this video is on YouTube as well for you to dive into that if you're interested. All right, cool. We've got the length of the survey.
Why don't you take this one, Audrey?
Sure. So like we kind of talked about, a relationship survey is measuring a lot more than a transactional survey. So logically, it's longer. Usually it's about a 10 to 15 minute survey with more questions, say around 50, versus a transactional survey. We're asking you about that specific experience. We can keep that really short, and the shorter the better over there. So just a few between 5 to 10 questions is great, could be up to 15. And those are much more quickly completed just in 2 to 5 minutes. So relationship surveys, we're asking a lot more questions and they're longer, whereas transactional surveys, we can keep them really short and get people on their way.
Right. I think this leads perfectly into the next one, which is how do you get folks to take these longer surveys?
Right. I mean, we do incentives if we need to, right? Audrey, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We almost never do incentives anymore on transactional. If we do them, they would be a sweepstakes. Not everybody would get an incentive. For long relationship surveys, if they're creeping past 15 minutes, you may have to offer some token incentive. But let me give everybody a secret on incentives, because I've looked at this a lot in my career. The bigger incentive generally doesn't work. So if you're thinking of $10 versus $1, do the $1. You're not going to get much of a bump going to 10. That changes when you go to very, very high incentives like $200, but that's unusual for anything but pharmaceutical type surveys where you're surveying doctors. But there's not many consumers outside of focus groups, which they often get that kind of number for sitting there for 90 minutes. It's all based on people's time, right? So just think about that. If you can get away with not doing that, I wouldn't do it. People these days love to share their views on things. So these incentives, I don't think are as necessary.
I know we've talked about this too, just, just building off what you said, Sean, about people loving to share their experiences these days, especially, just speaking as a consumer myself, when you know that there is potentially follow-up on a transactional survey, right? Like if I have a really bad experience buying shoes or something, I might be more likely to give feedback if I know that there is likely going to be some kind of follow-up to make that right. So
without a doubt. Without a doubt. And you see people doing that now on Twitter and other social media platforms, expecting a response from the company, and companies have these social media kind of armies that are responding to these consistently to big companies. So that's right. Definitely, it's the same idea though.
Yeah, exactly. All right, cool. Audience.
Right, Audrey. So when we do a relationship survey, it's generally focused on someone who's leading the customer experience program, right? So we're presenting findings either within our software platform or through some sort of analysis that we do offline. And we'll go through the results with them, with one or two people generally, and they would take it to share it with the rest of the organization somehow, right? Whereas transactional surveys, everybody who is responsible for a customer or customers gets access to the data through software platforms like PeopleMetrics, and they can log in and see, what was their customer's experience yesterday, and were there any problems, and do I need to follow up on them, and how can I resolve it? And so transactional surveys are operational in every sense, including they get distributed to the entire organization or anyone within the organization that needs to see that information.
Yeah, and I think that, Sean, you've talked about this before, but that piece there of having a wider distribution of the survey results on the transactional side, that's where you start getting into like real customer centricity, right? Where everybody's kind of seeing and interacting with that customer feedback day in, day out, all day long, and getting closer.
Right. Like I think in the first chapter of my book, I pointed this out, that, when you talk about customer-centric organizations, everybody wants that. And it's in a lot of mission statements, and it's in a lot of vision statements. Most employees don't know what that means until they start getting access to and being accountable for customer feedback based on an experience they've had recently. Once that starts flowing through the organization, and the organization is designed to create great customer experiences and improve them over time, then customer centricity then becomes a real thing, and the culture will slowly change to become more focused on the customer.
Very well said. That was great. Cool. Well, I think we're on to alerts.
Oh, Audrey, you love alerts.
I do.
I know you do. Why don't you take that one?
Yeah. So I love alerts for transactional surveys, meaning either a really positive experience where the respondent is calling out one of your employees and saying how great they were. We want to send an alert to recognize that employee, or a recognition alert is what we call it. Or for service recovery, if somebody had a poor experience and you need to go back and talk to them about it and help make it right, that's called a recover alert. And so for transactional surveys, we send out alerts to appropriate team members based on respondent survey answers. With a relationship survey, because the survey is all being fielded at once, it's going out to a larger population, it doesn't necessarily make sense to have alerts set up. You should look at all your responses and know what people are saying, but you don't necessarily need to alert in real time so that people can reach out in a specific amount of time. Where that's most important is with a transactional survey, because that response is related to a specific interaction that your respondent just had.
Yeah, alerts, let me throw out a couple more examples. Alerts are so great because they're based on a certain answer to a question, and it can be linked to any question. So these service recovery alerts, or recover alerts as we call them a lot, they're typically triggered based on either a customer having a problem in their most recent interaction, a dissatisfied overall experience, or if we're asking a promoter score, if there's a detractor, we would follow up on that as well, right? Audrey, those are typical things that we do, but
Yeah.
we can also follow up on, sometimes we ask a question, are you interested in any other products or services that we offer? And if they say yes, that can be an alert sent to the sales team. So these alerts can be, because they're transactional, because they've been most recently interacted with, they're fresh. You know, there was a company who would send their sales team out to talk to promoters, even based on that promoter score, thanking them for the recommendation, right? And obviously the idea would then be, you know, hey, if there's anybody that you could really recommend us to, it's a natural conversation to have. So the point is, these alerts are really valuable. They're flexible. The core ones are the ones Audrey talked about, service recovery and, you know, recognition of employees. But depending on your program, you can use these alerts in many different ways.
Our founder and CEO, Sean, wrote an amazing book about customer experience management called Listen or Die, 40 Lessons That Turn Customer Feedback into Gold. It's a deep dive into best practices for CX measurement and management strategy based off of Sean's years of experience in the space, and you can easily read it front to back on an airplane ride. Pick up your copy today. It's available now on Amazon. Another one that I like when you guys talk about is those you can set up something where you can look at passives, which are people that are, you know, that close to either going one way or the other, and taking action to move them. Obviously, you want to move them in the promoter direction. But yeah, a lot of great opportunities there.
Right. So, and the reason, Audrey said this, just to reiterate, though, the reason why alerts don't work necessarily well for relationship surveys is it's weird to reach out to a customer who you may not have interacted with for many months about feedback from many months ago. Customer may have just given it, but since it was something that they are kind of recollecting from the past year, it's really a hard conversation to have sometimes, and it's not typically recommended. Outside of, if you have a B2B organization with just a handful of customers, you know, hundreds, then that's something that we have seen them follow up on.
Yeah,
makes sense. All right, this is our last one here.
Last but not least, right, Audrey? You've done a bunch of this lately.
Yeah, analysis is super important. It's what are you going to do with your data after you get it? So in a relationship survey, we have kind of a finite fielding period, say 2 or 3 weeks, and then you have collected all your feedback, and then you're going to go on to analysis immediately after that fielding. So you'll take the time, either you or an analyst at your company or your whoever you're working with, PeopleMetrics will certainly do this for you. We'll analyze your data and create a report so that you have a very clear view of what your feedback says, distribution of responses, you know, sentiment of comments, all those things that are really important for you to know once you've collected all your feedback. With a transactional survey, you're going to have data constantly flowing in. So you want to make sure that you have enough customer responses to be able to make decisions when you're looking at the data in aggregate. So you'll probably need some period of time, like about a quarter, so that you have enough customer responses. But once you have it, then you can use PeopleMetrics, for example. We'll put all your data into dashboards in our platform so that you can see across your customer responses, you know, what's your overall experience score, or how many people are having problems, what products and services do people want to hear more about. So you can make some overall decisions based on that data when you have enough of it.
Right. Just with transactional in the beginning, you're just not going to have enough to do a report after 2 weeks.
Yep.
Where with relationships, since you're surveying everyone, you are certainly going to have enough to do analysis and reporting after 2 weeks. So that's why, just coming back to the purpose of all of this, if your purpose is to get a quick strategic baseline to understand where you are, even compared to competitors, strengths and weaknesses, and you need results, say, within the next month or so, relationships are a great way to go. You know, if you're interested in truly moving customer centricity within your organization, to get better at delivering within a key touch point, to recover potentially lost customers and reduce churn immediately, transactional is a great way to start. The best way to start is to map out a relationship survey at least once a year, and then focus in on whatever you think moments of truth are within your customer base, and make sure that you're listening to them on a transactional basis continuously. That's the secret to these two things. They're complementary. It's not one or the other, it's both. and have fun with it. It's an amazing way to talk to your customers and have a good conversation.
Well, Sean, you answered both of the questions that we had in our questions, which were, how do you decide which survey to use and which survey should you use to start your VOC program? So that was a great answer of really like, it depends on what your goals are to start, but ultimately you want to be using both. So before we wrap up, do you guys have any other final words you want to send our friends off with?
I think you covered it, just that there are times to use both a relationship or a transactional survey. And in most cases, it makes sense to do both.
And I think the one thing is, if, take an objective look at your program. If you find that you've done one and not the other, if you're doing all relationship like once a year and you're not doing transactional ever, you're leaving a lot on the table. You're leaving a lot of value on the table in terms of things that you can do to improve operations every day. Conversely, if you're only doing operational and transactional work and you never take a step back and ask all of your customers kind of what their feelings are about the overall relationship, you're also not getting as much as you can out of the program. And just take a look at your program and see what you're leaning towards. Maybe you haven't done a relationship survey in 2 or 3 years. It's probably a good idea to do it now, especially since the world's changed so much in the last year. Highly recommend that you do a relationship survey as soon as you can.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're doing just one or the other, you likely have blinders on, right? If you're just looking at big picture or only looking at one touch point, it's good to have a holistic view of both. Well, great. Thank you both for this really awesome conversation. I think it was great to go through the table, and I'll make sure that when we put this up on our YouTube channel to include a link to download this chart. It's just a good thing to reference. And yeah, we're happy to share it with all of you. So yeah, we've just been talking today about the 9 key differences between relationship and transactional customer surveys. And I hope that you all, everyone on the line, found this valuable. And I thank you for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live today. And on behalf of everyone here at PeopleMetrics, thank you for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe right here so you never miss an update. And have you checked out other sessions of PeopleMetrics Live yet? You can click right here to watch them all. I'll see you there.